Welcome to Season 2 of the Empower to Heal podcast. I'm your host, Dina Tipshirani, and I'm so excited to take you on a journey through the ups and downs of motherhood. Together, we are going to learn, prepare for, and unearth all things motherhood, because I believe that exposure and awareness can lead to empowerment. So buckle up for an unfiltered, raw, and insightful journey. Welcome back. I'm so excited you're here today. I'm excited because we're going to geek out a little bit around the neurological impact of matrescence. Okay, so we spent some time talking about what matrescence is. I think we all have an understanding of the different ways it can impact us, whether it's psychologically, neurologically, physically, emotionally, relationally. And I really want to spend this episode just diving in deep around the neurological impact and effect of matrescence. So many of us have heard the word mom brain before. If you are listening to this episode right now and you're currently pregnant or you have children or both, you absolutely know what mom brain is. The best way I can describe mom brain is like all of a sudden you birthed your baby and you birthed part of your brain too. Like it went out with the placenta, like out came the baby, out came the afterbirth, out came half of your brain. And you feel like you literally lost a part of your intelligence and your knowing. And when this first happened to me, I thought I was going crazy. The simplest things became extremely difficult. For instance, there was this one moment where I had a complete breakdown. I just started crying and I told my husband that the breast pump wasn't working anymore. And for me, I had to exclusively pump to feed my child. We tried for over 3 months to support him in latching and transferring milk and had multiple procedures, and long story short, we couldn't do it. So what I did is I exclusively pumped to feed him. And when you exclusively pump and your baby is eating every 2 to 3 hours, you are pumping and feeding your child what feels like constantly. So the stretches of sleep that I got were very, very small because he didn't sleep very long between eating, and I didn't produce enough milk for him to pump a lot for him to be like many bottles ahead. So I really just had to wake up with him and pump in the beginning, pump right before he was going to be hungry. So I had food to give him when he was hungry. I could give him a bottle of my breast milk, and then I'd have to clean up after pumping. Then I'd have about an hour before I start the whole process over again. Now, you think when you get into a routine that things become second nature. Sometimes they do. My pump was my best friend. I knew it very, very well. But this one day I could not get the pump to work. And I literally had a meltdown. I was crying and terrified. This was the way I could feed my child, right? We didn't have formula for him. We've not introduced formula to him. The only thing he had ever had was breast milk. And I was very, very, very committed to only supplying him breast milk for eating. That was my choice. You can't judge if it's right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just what I chose to do and what felt right for me. And I'm not saying that's what's right for everybody. That was just me. But when I was experiencing this, I had panic. I can't feed my child if I can't get my breast pump to work. What am I going to do? I have to be attached to this thing constantly. It's literally there's an hour and a half between times of being attached to this machine to get milk for my baby. And I went to my husband crying and shaking and just overwhelmed, literal meltdown. And my husband looked at the pump and he flipped the switch on and it turned on. And I was baffled. What just happened? And there's only 2 switches on the pump that I had. It was a switch on and a knob to turn up the intensity of the suction. So you can't really get it wrong. But in my state of exhaustion and my mom brain, that executive function of operating my pump while being clinically sleep deprived and going through matrescence caused me to not know how to operate my pump under stress. That is my best example of what mom brain is. Other examples are finding my keys in the fridge when I was trying to get out of the house, right? Don't know how they ended up in the fridge. Somehow I put the keys in the fridge rather than where they belong. Other examples look like not knowing how to have a conversation with people anymore. Like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know if I'm not talking about like when my child is eating, having to pump to feed my child, if they've had bowel movements or how many wet diapers they've had, if I've gotten any sleep, how long they've slept. Like in those early few months, it just felt like that was my everything. I could not figure out how to have a conversation outside of that. And I remember going to work, and at the time, before I went on maternity leave, I was a program manager at an outpatient mental health clinic. And when I returned, they offered me an assistant director position. And I accepted, believing that, like, oh, great, I'm going to have 12 weeks. I took 12 weeks of FMLA in order to be home with my baby. I'm going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. 3 months off from work. I'm going to go back. Everything's going to be great. And I go back to work and I sit down with my supervisor and I'm like, look, I don't know if this is the best plan anymore. I don't know if I'm the person for the job. I was so eager to be back at work because I was so eager to be connected to a part of myself that I had been so disconnected to. I felt like when I birthed my son, I rebirthed myself. And I rebirthed myself into this life where this was my son and our journey together was my everything. And I was so excited to go back to work and do something that felt easy and natural and normal for me and familiar, like working in the mental health field. And so I was excited to go back, but I was terrified to go back in a position that would require more from me. And I told her, I think I lost half my brain. I don't know what happened, but I cannot operate the way I used to. I can't think. I can't operate a pump to feed my child sometimes. My keys are in the fridge. I don't know if I should be an assistant clinical director overseeing multiple like high-risk programs in a outpatient mental health clinic. I just don't know if that's the right move here. And she looked at me and she laughed. And I was like, I'm not kidding. And she was happy to have me back and happy to go slow to support me in figuring out what my role was going to look like. And I left that meeting reassured that she still believed in me, but completely out of touch with myself. And how am I going to get my brain to operate in a way where I need to? I have to keep an infant alive. I have to keep myself alive. And I have to keep like food on the table. I have to earn a living. I also want to do this thing that I've spent so much of my life training and working towards. I don't want to sacrifice that. So I began researching, why do I feel like I lost half my brain? And I went back into another supervision meeting with her later on with a research article that showed and shared about something called synaptic pruning that occurs after you have a baby. So that's what I want to share with you today, because I wish I knew our brains are supposed to do this. It is a survival mechanism that has allowed our species to exist for this long and to continue existing. We all experience mom brain. We all experience these feelings of loss of part of our brain, of being able to socialize and carry out higher executive functioning, like operating machinery, or our memory lapsing. These are things that happen neurologically on purpose. And I wish somebody had told me that I wasn't alone in this and that nothing was wrong with me. So here I am today, sitting in front of a microphone, hoping that every person listening to this on the other end of this podcast, hoping that you hear this deeply and profoundly. When you feel the effects of mom brain, know that it is expected. Know that it is natural. Know that it is okay and there's nothing wrong with you. And know that it is a survival mechanism. Now I'm going to teach you all about it right now, and it's not that complicated. It won't take too long to learn. We're going to stick with our short episodes, so this won't take up much of your time. But I want to teach you about neuroplasticity and synaptic pruning that occurs when you have a baby. So neuroplasticity is a fancy term to say that our brains grow and adapt. They don't just stay one way forever. Once upon a time, our species believed that you could not change an old habit. You could not regrow connections in your brain. We now know, thanks to neuroscience and really cool technology and research studies, that you can. Our brains are malleable. We can shift and grow. We can build new habits. We can learn new things. We can create new grooves and pathways and connections in our brain. And we can do this intentionally. And also our body does this naturally. So let me tell you about neuroplasticity in the postpartum season. When you birth your child, this also applies to anybody taking on the primary caregiver role for an infant, someone who is solely reliant upon you for every need that they have to survive. If you are that primary caregiver, if you are the person responsible for keeping this infant alive and fed and taken care of around the clock, then this happens to you too. So you don't have to be the birthing parent to solely experience this. We just call it mom brain in our society, but others experience this as well. Now, what this is it's called synaptic pruning. It's when our brain prunes something called gray matter in order for us to rapidly build neural connections to take care of our baby. Because our baby can't tell us what it needs in normal words and language that we automatically know. We have to adapt and learn this immediately when we have our baby. We learn their cries. We learn their social cues. Our body tells us what they need. I could feel at work when my son was hungry by my breasts letting down milk at work, and I knew it was time to pump, and I knew he was hungry. And he needed that, right? We have this amazing connection in our body to read our child's cues, to understand what they need, to know when it's time to pick them up and pat them on the back and shush them and rock and connect and let them hear our heartbeat and hear us breathing and the sound of our voice and smell us as we hold them against our skin and help them feel that familiar feeling of being in our womb, even though they're in our arms. We have to immediately know how to keep our baby safe, to recognize danger, to respond when they're hungry, to know what cry means. I need to change my diaper. My tummy doesn't hurt. I'm unwell. I hurt. I'm hungry. In order for our brains to make this connection and build these rapid connections to care for our child, our newborn, we prune what's called gray matter. Gray matter are parts of our brain that are responsible for some of our memory, some of our muscle control, some of our execution of high-level tasks, like if we are processing our emotions or regulating our emotions. It impacts our memories and our decision-making. And this isn't considered highly necessary in order to keep our child alive, right? We can trim and prune these connections so that we can put all of our attention and rapidly grow connections to care for our baby. Now, here's a crazy thing that we are learning about pruning of gray matter in our brain. The effects of this can last, so far science is saying, up to 2 years after birthing your baby. Now, I don't want to just say it's 2 years for everyone. Think of it, right? Think of parents of multiple children who are having the children closer together. Those parents may be experiencing the impact of this synaptic pruning for years and years and years because they birth another child and they have to prune again to create and make space for reading that baby's cues. So it's not just 2 years across the board. It's saying the impact may last up to 2 years. And research could tell us something different down the line, but this is what we know today. And what's fascinating about this is that if you think about how reliant your child is on you for everything, these are the formative years that we're learning how to care for them. These early years that our child needs us for absolute survival, for every little thing. These are the years that we feel the impact of the synaptic pruning, of the neurological changes in our brain due to matrescence, the impact of what society calls mom brain. And I'm going to take it away from the science lens for a second of just what research says, and I want to bring it to real life application. Because if your baby or your child is needing you to regulate their emotions, to keep them safe from all the decisions they're making around them and their exploring of the world around them, to feed them and nurture them, to change them and help them literally go potty, right? Not many 2-year-olds are potty trained. Many of them need diaper changes or support around that. If your little one needs that immense support, your brain is still operating in this way that requires you to read all of their cues, anticipate all of their needs, and provide them. And if you're doing that immense, incredible task, your brain's going to have to compromise elsewhere, right? Sometimes in society, we have this saying of like 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards, or we call them like learning leaps or regressions. And it's really not a regression. It's us creating space inside our brain so that we can leap forward and care for our baby and meet their needs, care for our children, meet their needs. And then once we've done that and we've built those connections and we've got this solid foundation and it's not rapidly changing anymore and our child's becoming a little bit more independent, we start rebuilding the gray matter in our brain, rebuilding the connections and the social interactions. So it can feel really awkward when you're coming out of this like long stint of having an infant or an early toddler, and now you're trying to figure out, how do I have social interactions? How do I make friends where I'm not just talking about what's going on with my baby or my little one? How do I talk about hobbies or common interests? Who am I outside of motherhood, right? And that question, who am I outside of motherhood? From experience, I've been asking myself that question for a while, but I haven't had the brain space to actually explore it until recently, until my child was about 7 years old, which crazy enough, there's other studies out there that say that the postpartum season can last up until 7 years. I think the postpartum season is just like everything after childbirth, and you are constantly growing and adapting to your child's different phases of life and how that's evolving and changing you in your seasons of life. But if we think about it through the lens of like common sense, it makes sense that our brain has to compensate in a way to allow us to be what we need to support our child in surviving and thriving and taking care of all of their needs. And then once that is settled and safe and our child becomes more independent, we can step back into pieces of ourself, like our identity, like social interactions, like reconnecting and growing some of these like pieces of our memory that are coming back, or finding our coordination again outside of rocking a baby, right? You reclaim yourself outside of this stage of mom brain. So this is just a little tidbit that I wish someone had taken the time to educate me on. I wish it was something I learned about in high school, in like biology or anatomy classes, right? Like something where we can sit and understand, if you choose to become a parent, if you become a parent in your life, these are things that we can expect to happen and nothing's wrong with you. So for you, mama, if you are in the midst of throes of mom brain, feeling like you're losing your mind, if you feel like you birthed part of your brain and it lost it when you birthed your child, just know it's normal. It's necessary. It's how you keep your baby alive, and you'll have an opportunity to regrow that gray matter and reconnect with yourself in those ways again. Just give yourself a little grace because you're doing immense, incredible things. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I can't wait to continue our discussion on matrescence in our next episode. It has been an honor to share this space with you today on the Empower to Heal podcast, where we illuminate the strength you have within yourself to heal. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming episodes, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.